Welcome back to the Lords and Lore podcast. I'm Matt.
I'm Luca.
And I'm Will.
And this is a sexy podcast for sexy nerds. Wait a sec. That's not our intro as it normally was. And why is that? Well, the reason is because you're now able to review our show on Apple Podcast. So please do so with a 5-star review and tell us why you love us, but also include an alternate tagline for the show. And if we like your review, we will use that tagline for the following episode. So thanks to Cam, who sent that one in, friend of the show, maybe shortly going to be seen on an episode of Unabashed. I don't know, by the time this comes out and that comes out, you might forget about that. But let it be known, this is a sexy podcast for sexy nerds. We're all about that here. If you didn't already, you should check out last week's episode of Unabashed, where I had Joe Lopez on to talk about My Hero Academia and shipping characters and all that fun stuff. But today, we are continuing on our series about D&D classes, not how to play those classes specifically, or how D&D works or anything like that. But if you want to play one of those classes, this is the place you want to come for inspiration on characters like that, what those characters represent in fantasy, and how we feel about those types of characters. So today we are continuing down our list alphabetically, and we have landed on Druids. Initial thoughts, guys. Druids.
I've never played one, never been a huge fan. Excited to get into it with you guys.
Okay. Cool. But before we do, we need to get into Luca's litany of literature, wherein Luca has the podcast within the podcast and tells us a little bit about some fantasy goings on of his week. And then I bring a monster to the table in Matt's Monster Musings. We talk a little bit about its use in fantasy or tabletop role-playing games. So without any further ado, my friend, what's going on this week?
Big surprise. I'm still reading
What?
What?
So, brother.
I'm about I just passed the halfway point of book 7, Reaper's Gale. And I decided to maybe give us a little theme today. Let's talk about villains in fantasy just for a second, quick second, because Malazan is rife with very well fleshed out villains. One of which is sort of the main antagonist of this story, named, I guess that's a spoiler for one of the books. He is a villain who has it's Will, everyone. He's how do I describe him? He is a tortured soul because he is cursed to live and die again and again. He wields a sword that was given to him by a god, and this sword, every time he dies, his soul is sent back to the realm of this god, who then simply sends him back to his body.
Is this the sword you talked about in our episode on MacGuffins?
This is not Dragnipur. This is this is a different sword. An unnamed as of yet sword. And it is in the hands of somebody. Which is a spoiler for book.
Spoilies.
Yeah, no spoilers. It's a spoiler for book 5. So I will not dive into who wields the sword.
Can I just say, I think, what's this guy's name who wrote this?
Steven Erikson.
And the other guy?
I believe Ian Esselmont.
Yeah, they should be paying us the way you're fucking promoting this book series. They should put us as like executive producers if it ever gets made to a TV.
I would love that so much. I would love that. So Steven Erikson, if you're listening, I will produce your TV show.
Nice. Anyways.
So I can't say his name because it's a spoiler. So this villain is like, he begins simply as a normal guy. Like, I mean, not a normal guy. He begins as a sort of an innocent before he is corrupted by the blade, and he serves as
corrupted by the blade.
He serves as the
girls. I was studying the blade, becoming corrupted by it.
It's like he's such a sympathetic villain once you like see his point of view, because the reality of his life, like simply existing in this like maddening state, like having to die and be reborn, and every time he's reborn, he's like reborn screaming in pain.
Oh shit.
So like none of it is like an easy process. Like he feels the pain of dying, and then he's returned with the pain of the wounds, and his own physical body. Okay, I'm going to very loosely speak about what happened to him right before he was essentially returned for the first time. So he was dead, and as his physical body was dead, his soul was conversing with the god, and in the meantime his body was being prepared for burial. And the burial process of the Edur, which is the people he comes from, involves covering the entire body with gold coins.
Oh, okay.
And since he was of a royal bloodline, he received golden coins covering his entire body. And this process was finished before he returns for the first time.
Okay.
So he returns to his body that has been completely sheathed in individual gold coins. So he is now like alive, awake, with the searing pain of having gold coins in his flesh.
Oh,
and
like
having to
shit.
yeah,
Okay.
like all everywhere, on his eyes, like everywhere. And he now like lives with the weight of an entire body of gold on him. Like that's his first awakening.
Wow, that's yikes. Okay.
So it is horrifying from his perspective. It's just such a, it's so nice to read us. I mean, nice. Maybe that's the wrong word. It's rewarding to read a story with villains who have maybe not clear motivations, but clear reasons for their madness.
Yes.
So I want to see, like, how do you guys feel about, I mean, obviously you probably feel good about well-written characters, dumb question. But do you have any like examples of like some villains that you guys know that are like, that really like enhance the story because they were so like either relatable or understandable or just well fleshed out?
So off the top of my head, I'm gonna try to think of one while I ramble for a second here. But I actually wanted to talk about, I think fantasy is the genre that I think in sort of like superhero movies too, I guess, even a little sci-fi, not as much, I find, but fantasy and superhero genre movies are often where evil for the sake of evil villains are put. It's like, oh, why is this guy trying to destroy the world? I don't know. He's a lich. And that's it, you know? But even like, I fucking hate to talk about Harry Potter because J.K. Rowling sucks, but like, and even like Voldemort, like, you know, we sort of see a little bit of why he became, but it's never really like one of like the motivating things that you think about when you think of that character. So I don't, that just, and like, obviously like there's Sauron, unless you've like read the books and really under like the Silmarillion and everything, like you don't really understand. It's just, he's the evil force because we need an evil force, you know, to sort of justify the heroes being heroes, which I don't innately hate. I hate it in superhero movies because when you have a world that's trying to be based in reality, to just have something that's pure evil, I think is like a disservice to your story, because in our own world, there's seldom ever people who are just evil for there are, but there's usually reasons why. And I think to solve the issue, you actually have to dig deep into those reasons and fix the things that are happening, more akin to someone like a Killmonger, right? You know, you might not be able to help Killmonger and change his views, but we should address the problem at the root, which is, you know, the poverty and the systemic racism that takes place in places like America. So yeah, I'm trying to think of a villain that recently that struck me as like not one dimensional. There are a couple in the series I talk about a lot, the Raven Shadow, that are very, very interesting. But their sort of justifications for things are, some of them are just evil, but others are like cursed with power. And then they get that complex of, I have to lead the world into a new dawn or whatever. So I think those characters are interesting too, just like god complex, terrible people, I guess. I don't know. What do you think, Will?
I don't mind evil for the sake of evil in fantasy. Um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, if you can do like, it, like for me, it kind of feels like a lot of like recent fantasy, especially like mainstream. I'm thinking Game of Thrones just because I watched an episode earlier tonight. But I don't like. I'm not the biggest fan of like fantasy that's based in reality. Um, so like I do kind of sometimes prefer like evil for the sake of evil. Like I like Sauron, but then again, like a lot of like Tolkien's like source materials were like European myth where that's like evil was just evil. But
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe reality is based.
I think too, though, like there's something to be said of like evil
I,
existing as like an entity. I'm okay with that. I love that. But
yeah,
I
like
think like when a human guy is just evil because I want to rule the world, I don't know, it's just cheesy to
yeah,
me.
that reminds me of like so there's like a retcon chapter of, like Berserk where like that's pretty much like what evil is just like it's called like the idea of evil, and it's just like humanity's like thoughts and desires and stuff like that just basically like formed like this like lump that's like in a different dimension. That's just kind of like what kind of controls the world and stuff like that. But it's like that definitely is like evil for the sake of evil. But
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I don't know. To me, like fantasy is like reality based, like fantasy, like isn't really fantasy. If that kind of makes sense. Like I don't know. So I definitely like the whole like tropes of hero versus villain. So yeah, shoot me.
No, I don't think there's a right answer. Villains are villains. If they're written well, they're good,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I mean, like good writing is always like the utmost important thing about fantasy. So
Yeah, but like even just the motivation being like when it's evil for the sake of evil, oftentimes it's like the motivation is to just destroy the world and like and then what, you know? Like that's
Yeah.
your big goal. It's funny you mentioned Voldemort because like he's literally like why he just wants to take over the school. Like why can't you just do it? Like why are you so weak, bro?
yeah, like
This is the
one
guy who
school.
peaked in high school, like not ready to give it up. He's
And even
coming
his
back to
name, like
coach the team.
Voldemort means love of death in French. Like
Yeah.
Absolute snake beta.
I think too though, like I've always seen fantasy, and I think this is why fantasy gets like sort of like shit on to people who think like fantasy is childish or equate fantasy or like animation with like works for children, is because I've always seen fantasy as uh a medium to tell the same stories you would in the grounded universe, but make it interesting or don't make it black and white, right? Like you can have a story about race issues, you can have a story about classism in fantasy without people in the real world um having to like subject themselves to seeing their own trauma unfold again. Like it is in a way, but it's an escape in the same sense too. Like I don't know, I think of like the orcs in Skyrim. Um and it could be seen as racist even that you're equating like indigenous people to orcs. That alone is a fucked up comparison, but the way they're treated is not dissimilar from the way First Nations people are treated here or were initially. They still are, but you know what I'm saying. um, so I think that's a way to tell a story and give people who would otherwise not, like maybe people from privilege who would otherwise not see these things or refuse to see these things. It's a way to sort of inject that into your storytelling. But I don't know. I think grounded in reality fantasies are interesting um, for the same reason, in that people exist. What would happen if we injected elements into it? But those are more in line for me with like superhero movies, like the world exists. What if there was a Superman? You know,
mhm.
medieval Europe happened. What if there was magic? Type of thing. You know?
Yeah, I mean, it also depends what you mean by grounded in reality. Like, there's the Game of Thrones grounded in reality where it's like barely any fantastical elements. Whereas, like, if you're just talking about like a world full of magic, but with like people's real motivations and the way people actually act in a society or in a government, like You know, like I love that. Like that's Malazan. Like there are
Yeah.
few very good people in this world. Like,
And I think like that's how I go into D&D games. I don't go in being like I want to play a campy fantasy thing. I go in being like, what would the person I made do in this situation?
yeah.
Or if I'm playing the NPCs, same thing. Like, you know, you try to treat it as if it's real so that the experience you're getting out of it is one that feels that way, type of thing.
I also think
And
there's so sorry to cut you off, Matt.
no, go ahead.
There's like when you're talking about like that grounded, when you have villains that have understandable motivations, oftentimes you have to have heroes that also have understandable flaws. Like
Yeah.
like the where your heroes are like slightly lighter gray than your villains, you know, like I love that, for example. Like that's to me is very like realistic fantasy still.
Yeah, because I feel like often the evil for the sake of evil needs a good for the sake of good, or right
Yeah.
for the sake of right. And like again, in the real world, that's never the case. Even people who are written about or remembered in history as being heroes, when we go back now, you know, we're able to pull up the information. We got the receipts for like, yeah, that guy, not such a great person. Those women, you know, not great all around, if you catch my drift. But yeah, I don't know. I think I see so I lost my train of thought. But I like to see good and evil as a matter of perspective. Like I don't like fully it's evil just because it's evil. I think the people who are following that evil person, they should be motivated in some sort of way besides you know,
Absolute terror.
enthrallment. Yeah. Like I would like, and maybe it's in the books, but like, why did the Easterlings follow Sauron? Like for the promise of power, but like, do you really trust Sauron? Like, you know what I mean? Yeah, I'm not sure if that's ever explained, but like that's what's interesting to me. Like, if bad guys, like their legions of evil people should have a reason to follow them. And so they should be at least justified in some sort of capacity. Yeah.
So yeah, that's I mean, just
This-
I've mentioned like a few villains. I don't know if you guys remember when I was talking about like the worst possible fantasy events and stuff. Like even that, where it was like just horrifying entire armies. There was like a very clear reason why people descended into that like utter madness.
Right. Yeah.
And it just like it didn't justify it or anything, but like it made
It
sense.
explains it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I shouldn't say justified that. I should say explains why.
Yeah,
people
exactly.
follow him. Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, that will do it for this addition to the litany.
Love it. So yeah, let's jump into Matt's Monster Musings. I have, if I say the Wraith of the Deep, what do you think of?
The
Like a
deep
ghost in a deep trench underwater. So kind of like stuck spirit or something.
Interesting.
Yeah, whenever I hear the deep, I think of like Dark Souls 3. So like the deep is just like another word for like the abyss, which is a whole other thing to explain. But yeah, basically just like an abyss, you know.
Yep, you're not wrong. It can be both. It can be neither. It's a little bit of a strange name, and it is the alternate name for the creature called the Morkoth. That's Morkoth. Now, you said ghosts, you said creature from the abyss. I'd probably call this more of a creature from the abyss because it is like a squid-like being. Can have a beak, sometimes it doesn't, with lobster-like legs, but also tentacles. Very disgusting. And adorned on its back, like Tamatoa from Maui, are all the treasures it collects from people that worship it, or that it's gained by itself. Yeah, it's just Will. I'm just explaining a picture of Will.
Will with flippers.
The origins of the Morkoth. Obviously, there's a picture shown for people who are watching. If you're listening, you could look up the Morkoth yourself, but also our YouTube channel has all the pictures included as well. But long ago, a deity of greed and strife perished in the battles among the immortals. So a god of greed and strife died fighting good gods, hopefully. Its body drifted through the astral plane, which in D&D is like this plane of existence that's sort of like an open expanse of space. In some D&D, you can breathe there, and others, I'm not as certain. But eventually, this perished corpse of this god became a petrified husk, and it floated up against the pearlescent remnant of a celestial matter imbued with life and life-giving magic. So it hits this like cloud of celestial energy. The collision shatters both objects, releasing a storm of chaotic energy. Countless islands of mixed matter spun away into the silvery void. Within some of them, a vein of pearl-like material held a bit of the deity's rejuvenated supernatural vitality. Holy fuck. Which spontaneously created a habitable environment. So we have this corpse of this god hitting into this cloud of celestial energy, breaking into 100,000 pieces. And some of those pieces maintain the energy of these godly beings. On those same islands, a bit of the god's petrified flesh came back to life in the form of tentacled monstrosities, brimming with malice, greed, and that's it, malice and greed. Ever since that time, each Morkoth has had an extraplanar island to call home. So, that god breaks it to 100,000 pieces, and the flesh and the lively silvery thread of celestial magic fuse together and create these disgusting squid-like, lobster-like, tentacled, just crab-like entities called the Morkoth. And Morkoths, obviously, as you could probably imagine, are greedy pieces of shit. Now, I first was made aware of the Morkoth while watching a Critical Role, where there's a Morkoth called Vokodo. So these islands that they talk about, Morkoth, if it has the ability to, can teleport this island. This specific Morkoth, spoiler warning for Critical Role, was fleeing from, I'll just say, an entity in the astral plane. Okay? So it transported its island into the prime material plane, the world as we know it, and just in the middle of the ocean started this island. So why is that important? A Morkoth's island may be found anywhere, even the bottom of the ocean or the void or the astral plane or the hells or the abyss or the, I don't know, the celestial plane. Anywhere you could think, they might have a place there. These hundreds of thousands of islands spread out across the universe, as we know. So like I was saying before, it has all this gear and items and, you know, statues and whatever, anything that is worth anything and piques the eye or the interest of the Morkoth, it'll adorn on its back or in its lair. And it's aware of every single object it owns. It can know wherever it is at any time. So if you steal from a Morkoth, you know, it might not come for you right away, but it's going to come at one point, and that's going to get ugly because Morkoths are super powerful. Not only can they cast spells, but they have potent hypnotizing or
Hypnosis.
Hypnosis. Thank you. Yeah, in Critical Role, the team shows up at this island where they're supposed to, like I was talking about last time about gods. There's this god who tried to trick people into going there because this specific Morkoth, Vokodo, can make people forget who they are if they stay on this island for too long. So let me read you off some of the regional effects of the island of a Morkoth. So the Morkoth is aware of any new arrival, whether an object or a creature. So if you show up in a boat or you show up swimming, it knows you're there. And again, this could be anywhere. So the island is just its area of existence. As an action, the Morkoth can locate any one creature or object on the island. Visitors to the island feel as though they are being watched even when they aren't. So if you're running one of these monsters for your players, you just get them to roll random perception or insight checks or whatever, and you just get the feeling that you're being watched. And sometimes maybe you throw a group of tribes people at them, and they go, oh, that must have been what it is. And even later, they still get that same eerie feeling. A new arrival will have to make a save every night they are in the region. If they fail the save, one of their items goes missing upon awaking. They get to choose the item, and if they find the item in a certain time frame, just by looking around, they'll recover the item. But if they don't, that item appears on the back of the Morkoth. Okay. So you might wake up and your sword's gone. If you look around, oh, I didn't put it there. Why is it there? That's weird. You might create like a hostility between your party members, like, why are you sleeping with my sword? Kind of thing. Because it just shows up somewhere random. Like, are you trying to steal my stuff? But if they don't find it, it goes missing until you encounter this thing. If you encounter this thing. So there's an enchantment on the layer that the Morkoth lives in. So probably like in an underground cave network, or this one, Vokodo, was in a volcano, but somewhere a little bit ways from the surface of the island. The Morkoth has this enchantment on the entrance to their lair, where if you go there, you become compelled, if you failed your save, to take the most direct path straight to the Morkoth without your knowledge of what that path may be. So one of your party members might just start fucking hauling ass, heading straight down this network of caves, and you're like, where are you going? And eventually you will become face to face with one of these disgusting creatures, where then you can make another save. They can also change the temperature or the state of the water that they are in or swimming in, or just around them. So your players might swim up to try to encounter this Morkoth and be set like in boiling water. With a thought, the Morkoth can initiate a change in the water. Yeah, blah blah blah. So, yeah, these things are pretty terrifying. And what this Vokodo, like I said, it wiped the memory of these people. So if you failed enough saving throws while you were there, you forgot who you are. So the party in Critical Role come across this village of people who worship this fire god, as they call it. And every month they send one of their like this druid in the village, druids, that goes to this place and gives them like the finest possession in the village at that time. And all these people have names and stuff like that, and they all have lives and duties within the village. And when, spoilers, the creature is finally defeated, those are not their names, those are not their professions. Some people have children with each other on the island, and then, have their mind cleared and realize they had a family waiting for them back home, and they've been on this island for 5 years. And none of them are aware of how long they've been there. It all gets foggy after a certain period of time. Major fucking spoilers here. This character, Keyleth, from the first campaign of Critical Role, goes on her journey. She's sort of like the Avatar. She's got to go to the fire tribe and the water tribe. She's the air tribe and the earth tribe to learn how to use druidic abilities. But she goes on that. She is the can't remember what her title is, but she goes on this journey called the Aramente. And the reason why she goes is because her mother went and never came back. And she discovers her mother's leg in this plane of water while on her journey to the water tribe. And that's all they ever recovered was the leg. And so this next campaign takes place like 30 or 20 or so years later with a totally new group of characters. And they go to this island and there's this woman there who shows them about the island. And she's actually the one who takes the valuables to Vokodo. And one of her legs is made out of vines. And so you find out that she's obviously Keyleth's mother and has had her memory erased and has just been living on this island for however long, not knowing that there's people out there who are looking for her. And there's this beautiful moment at the end where she like returns to Keyleth. And then, she like, because druids, sort of like dryads I talked about before, can use this spell called Tree Stride and step through a tree and come out of another tree in a different part of the world. So she steps through this tree and Keyleth is just there waiting for her. It's really nice. There's some fan art. It's cool. Okay. So yeah, that's the Morkoth. What are you guys' initial thoughts while I pull up its monster sheet?
Yeah, super gross. Like, no interest in encountering it. Seems ridiculously strong also. Like in terms of D&D, just seems like a nightmare. Almost as bad as the Merilith, honestly, I think. Like, I don't know about like combat rating or anything, but it seems up there in difficulty.
Yeah. It's a challenge rating 11. Obviously, I think the one they fought in Critical Role was like they're usually about like 6 feet tall and wide, but this one was like a monstrous, like dragon turtle size type of thing.
Mm.
So theirs was a little bit more difficult. Will, thoughts?
Yeah, I take it.
Yeah, I think so.
um, I mean, it sounds like it was heavily inspired by like the deep ones from Shadow over Innsmouth, Lovecraftian.
Ah, cool.
It's like pretty much like even especially when you like mentioned like the Critical Role campaign / episode, because like that's pretty much like people like there's like a town that which is like Innsmouth that like does like sacrifices and stuff like that. But instead of like I don't know, so like right now I'm looking at like the 5th edition like version
Yeah.
of from like the D&D monster manual, and it's like they look kind of different because like the deep ones in like Lovecraft, like Shadow over Innsmouth is like they're more like humanoid. They're basically just like humans with like fish heads.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then
So there's a bunch of different depictions. Some of them they're just like stingrays that are stood like flat up and have
yeah,
like legs. Super funny looking.
tentacle boys. But actually the DLC for Bloodborne was like heavily inspired by um Shadow over Innsmouth. So like there's like an entire section where like it's like the very final end of like the story for Bloodborne, and like that's like pretty much like that's like those are like the kind of creatures that you fight, which is like variations of that.
Oh, gross.
Yeah, it's like I would definitely say it's like a pretty it's definitely worth the read out of all of
So
Lovecraftian horror.
there's one that's similar. Like I mentioned, Tamatoa from have you guys seen Moana?
No.
I haven't, but I looked up a picture of him when you mentioned him. It's pretty
Yeah.
funny.
So he's this giant crab. He's played by Jermaine from I can't remember his last name, Jermaine, but he's from Flight of the Concords.
No, yeah.
He's Vlad from What We Do in the Shadows. Super good. The song is super shiny, super catchy. But yeah, he's just like this greedy little crab who he's not little, he's fucking huge. He actually has Maui's staff, and that's why they have to go there to retrieve it from him, type of thing. But a little bit more about what this thing can do in D&D. So it has up to 6 level spells. Acid Splash, Mage Hand, Mending, Darkness, Detect Thoughts, Shatter, Dispel Magic, Lightning Bolts, Sending, Dimension Door, so it can take itself away from a fight if it needs to. And in some cases, they can actually teleport themselves to different planes of existence. Obviously, Chain Lightning is sort of as high as their spells go, but also, Luca, let's say you're a wizard. You see this thing. What's the first spell you're casting?
Dimension door on myself.
Oh, okay. Let's say
add it.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, probably not a fireball. Maybe a polymorph.
Okay. So let's say it saves your polymorph. It has an ability called Spell Reflection that if you miss or it saves, that spell gets reflected back to you. And so if you fail your own save at that point, now you're polymorphed.
Can I just say D&D does not respect wizards enough? Like, I just
but, yeah, any spell from it, not just wizards, but
I know, but
so I think there was an instance in Critical Role where a disintegrate spell got flipped on somebody, and it was like an inch of them like dying or something. I can't remember quite, but yeah, really scary stuff. But yeah, so let's put it up against the Merilith. What would you guys rather take?
Alone or in a party?
Let's say both. Does it change your answer?
No, I just realized it doesn't. I still take the squid for
Okay.
or
The Morkoth.
Morkoth, yes. Yes.
And Will?
I mean, if I was playing a paladin, both would just be crushed to death instantly.
Just smite them.
Yeah. No, I'd probably take the Morkoth.
So it is technically an aberration too, right? So I think your smites might I don't remember how smites work if aberrations included in there. But I forgot last week was actually the androsphincter. So, um,
Oh
Cox and
yeah.
androsphincter. So, would
The
you
Marilith was just too OP to start with.
exactly? Would you take this over the androsphinx or?
I would not. I would take the
Okay.
Sphinx, I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
The Sphinx
Especially-
seems more survivable to me.
Just wheel the Sphinx.
Yeah. Okay, good stuff. So that'll do it for Matt's Monster Musings. So let's go ahead and jump into our main topic of druids. Will, what do you have for us, you little weenie?
Yeah. Well,
Oh boy.
I guess like what's what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear a druid?
When
Like
I hear
in
druid,
like from fantasy or like in real world? Like what?
Whatever.
I mean, to me, a tree person. Like, yeah, like
Like an environmentalist. Like a data-
the first thing that comes to my tree bird, that's stupid. The first thing that comes to mind is actually the name of this rugby club I used to have to play against. They were called Druids. But if you're talking about fantasy, I think of like a sort of dude who doesn't shower and lives in the woods and is friends with animals and can shift into animals and
Like
Radagast the
me.
Brown.
um,
I think of you.
naked in the woods.
As all things were meant to be.
I mean, like definitely for me, first thing that comes to my mind is the druid from Diablo 2. It's
Ooh.
definitely like one of my like favorite classes for Diablo 2 because it's basically like a barbarian that can like cast spells. And I mean, like when you look at like the historical druid, I mean, just think of like any sort of like priest slash priestess of I mean of most of like European groups, kind of like it's kind of hard to like pin down. I mean, if we jump back to like the barbarian discussion, they were kind of like the religious, I guess, and also just like cultural leaders, I should say, more so than religious, of like all these different like groups and stuff like that scattered throughout like
So like a
continental.
shaman type of thing.
Yeah, kind of, yeah. I mean, if you want like a decent like historical depiction, like a good example would be like the Wrath of the Druids DLC for like Assassin's Creed Valhalla. They did a pretty good job with it because again, it's just like the cultural leaders of these groups. I mean, they would kind of like fill the role of like, I guess like historian, but also like kind of like I don't want to say like healer, but like that's kind of like what they were doing. 'Cause every time I think of the word healer, I think of like a cleric. But yeah, I mean like they were kind of like the ones like kind of like the community like doctor slash priest kind of thing. Um, I mean usually like in a lot of like when I've seen it in fantasy, like I said, the first thing that comes up is like some sort of like spellcaster slash barbarian. Um, maybe more so like the beta version of the Chad barbarian.
Oh my god, dude.
Okay. I mean, because like in Diablo, like the druid class, like they get like kind of like these like totem wands, but also can like summon like bears and stuff like that, and also can like shapeshift and that kind of stuff. And like that's kind of like how a lot of like these like druids, I guess, slash like cultural leaders were kind of like seen as, um, kind of like mysterious. Um, I mean, like yeah, they kind of filled like a leadership role, but that wasn't like a political one almost.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, like
definitely got
spiritual leader, cultural.
yeah, definitely got like they were promptly done away with as like Christianity spread into Europe. Uh, yeah, I mean, like again, like Wrath of the Druids, like the DLC for Assassin's Creed Valhalla definitely does a good job of like showing that conflict between like Christianity like as it's growing, and like I guess like the old world of Europe.
Right.
Um, yeah,
Yeah. Sort of like the trope, or like the, geez, what's the word I'm looking for? Like the witch doctors, as they're often called in like video
yeah,
games, that are probably behind the times a little bit. Um,
yeah. I think that they're often like I think like Druid is often like kind of like synonymous with like the European version though. Like that's how
right.
like I've always seen like Druids as depicted. Um, yeah,
Was Diablo your first encounter with a druid?
yeah. I mean, not in real life.
Fucking this guy, man. What about you, Luca? What was your first what do you recall your first time?
I don't know about first time. Maybe one of the examples I brought, the foggy swamp tribe from Avatar: The Last Airbender. They're
Ah,
not
yes.
really they're not really druids in like maybe the D&D traditional definition, but there was some like weird spiritual stuff going on in that swamp, and they have like a weirdly intimate connection with the natural environment there. So I would classify them as druids.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're on my list too. So
Like
no.
like if were I to think of like I think that like what separates a druid from I guess like other magic users is like I've always seen them as like in fantasy as like drawing from like nature,
Mhm.
kind of like sage mode from like Naruto, right? Um,
Absolutely. Yeah, it's like
yeah,
it's a totally different type of chakra. It's one you
yes,
have to take from, you know, the earth, and not necessarily from um what we know chakra
yeah,
sort of comes from.
or like I forget like their exact like I forget like the exact like enemy name type, but like in Skyrim they have like the Forsworn like mages and stuff like that. I think that'd be
All right,
an
briar
example.
hearts or
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Those things are creepy as hell. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, when they cut out their own hearts, put it at taproot. Um,
Yeah. And you could like pickpocket them. Yeah,
yeah,
if you pickpocket the taproot, they just die.
yeah.
But
Um,
yeah, I think like I love that side of druidic magic too, where it's like gross, like cutting out your heart and putting it in taproot. And then like the ang sort of like I just love nature,
Yeah.
like I love like the
yeah.
array,
Um, because like yeah, I mean like a lot of times like these like so for example like again jumping back to like the barbarian episode I mentioned like the Battle of Teutoburg. That's one where I talked about. Remember I mentioned like how like all those like Romans stuff that were like whacked by a bunch of
Sure, yeah.
barbarian-esque.
Ah, the schwackening, right.
Yeah, the schwackening. Anyways, so like I found like this really good YouTube channel that talks about like Roman history and stuff like that, and like they kind of like talked about like what took place after. And so like there was like historical accounts from like Roman survivors, or basically like all like the Roman officers were like rounded up and they were like executed by like I guess these druid-esque like priests and stuff like that. And like it's like pretty graphic, but I always kind of like druids because like they have like that like terrifying like unknown part of nature is kind of like where they draw their power from. So I don't know. I always thought they were like kind of spookier than like a book mage.
Yeah. Yeah, let's dive fully into it, because Luca, obviously you're a wizard. I play a sorcerer sometimes. Well, you've played a cleric. Um, you know. But I honestly expected you both to say your first encounters with a druid were Bjorn from The Hobbit.
I mean, I haven't read the Hobbit book since like the fourth grade, so that's
oh,
probably true,
oh, I'm
but
sorry.
I don't
Oh,
remember.
oh, hey, this guy thinks The Hobbit's for kids.
You know, the
Oh,
Hobbit
big
is for
man read Malazan.
babies.
Yeah,
I don't I
get on
don't
my
know.
level.
I don't know
Holy
if I would
fuck.
say Bjorn is.
Yeah, but he's a druid.
Because
He shapeshifts into a bear. Like that's
yeah,
druid.
that's as druid as it gets, I think.
Yeah,
I
that's
guess
through and through.
I guess he
You're
does have
right.
like special honey, but
Yes, so I think I let's dive into what
I'd say more
means
Radagast,
in
but
fantasy. Yeah, definitely. So I think those are two ends or two parts of what go into a D&D druid, right? There's the natural magical abilities, but also there's the shape-shifting aspect of it too. So for me, when I was making my list, I was like, okay, Beast Boy. And he doesn't fit into that other end of it with magical powers, but he's a shapeshifter. He can be any animal. So he is someone you should look at if you're making a D&D druid, right? But he doesn't sort of get both areas. So you'd have to combine, like a druid you could define as Beast Boy meets Gandalf, you know, or meets Radagast type of thing.
Mhm. Yeah, I didn't even think about the shapeshifter that much. Like that's way more common, like trope that where you have like characters that are just shapeshifters, but nothing else from like the druidic sort of path of magic.
Right.
yeah,
Yeah, I like the idea of a druid just being like fuck humans and I'm gonna be a bear for a couple years and just staying in bear form, you know?
There's something about that that just never like drew me in to play that kind of character, you know?
You don't like turning into animals?
No.
You were a shark at one point in my campaign.
I was a salmon.
No.
And
You were a shark pulling a boat through a storm.
yes, no, you're right. You're right. I was a shark pulling a boat. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying there's no use for it, but like that's one spell a wizard knows, polymorph, you know?
Right.
Whereas like if that's the foundation of my magic, like being a bear that's kind of strong, like I'm not interested.
See, so at higher levels of D&D druidic magic, you could turn into a celestial being or a fucking
Yeah.
T-Rex or something.
Yeah, that's cool, but knowing I'll never get to level 20 druid, it's like, would I rather be a level 7, 8 druid or a wizard? Like I'll pick wizard every time.
But you also have you have access to every druid spell because they're one of those they're casting classes where you prepare your spells at the beginning of the day, you know?
But they're not pure mages, you know. I'm a mage purist, by the way. Like
no, we didn't notice.
yeah, I mean, I don't hate druids. I don't. But if I'm gonna go down a path of magic, shapeshifting is not my choice. Like do you guys become werewolves in Skyrim?
yeah.
Yeah, I've
One of
done
them.
it.
I actually preferred the vampire, but
See, I don't take either of those. I mean, like I didn't invest into either of those paths. Like,
man, immunity to poison.
But druidic
Drink to cure
shapeshifting is
wounds.
not lycanthropy, you know? They're two.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. Lycanthropy is like a disease, and being a druid is completely different. But there's just something about it. Like, I think it's the aesthetic of the druid that just doesn't draw me personally.
Yeah, you just wear
although they're
natural
cool.
deodorant, man. Modern. Motherfuckers smell like sandalwood and sage.
Mages that go in the woods.
Yeah, exactly. Is a mage who quit his accounting job and lives off
hiking
the grid.
bro.
Yeah, hike bro. Let's get into our favorites then.
The clappers of magic.
Yeah. But yeah, let's start with you, Luca. Then, so initially you said like before we started recording, you had more difficulty finding examples that like immediately came to you.
Yeah. I mean, just from what I've read, like just from the few like trilogies and books I've read in the past year, like I can't think of just even a single druid that's been like a main character. Since if you add like shape shifting, I guess like a lot of characters in Malazan are soul taken who can like shift into different creatures, but usually only one single creature.
Okay.
And they have like sort of the bloodline of that creature in them. So like people with like the draconian bloodline can turn into dragons.
So that's more like the werebears of the world, or
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's never really well explained, but there is one character who falls way more under the like druid umbrella, and his name is Bottle, and he is a mage. He's not a traditional druid, but his grandmother taught him the old ways of magic, which are like super ambiguous.
Right.
And he always is putting like there's a warren called Meanis, and it has to do with like thought and illusion and essentially like thought and emotion really. And he like projects his mind into like creatures, rats, insects, birds, owls, etc. And he's able to like warg through them, if you will.
See, yeah, I think that is also another alternative to shapeshifting, is being able to warg into things like
Yeah,
Bran.
like take over their minds, and so that's like it's cool. But again, there's again, the usefulness of that kind of ability in the real world would be like immense, like being able to like scout out anything by like being an owl,
Yeah,
which I do often in D&D.
correct. Yeah,
Ulia the owl.
right.
Yeah, so Bottle is one example, and I have one more for anybody who has played the Witcher game. Technically this character was in the show too. He went by the name of Mousesack in the show.
He's the like the guy who works at the castle where Ciri's at. Right?
Yeah, with the beard.
Advisor
Yeah.
to Sintra.
Yeah. In the games, you know him as Ermion, and he is the advisor to King Bran on Skellig Island. And he's way more of like a pure druid. Like in the game, he has like a top hat like covered in twigs and stuff, and so he's talking about nature and all this stuff, and like that's my only. And he's like what I think of when I think of a druid, like some old man always talking about trees, like it just like that's the aesthetic that I think of when I think of a druid. And that's just like yeah, just go chill in your forest, man. Like leave you alone. That's how I feel about druids. I'm not right, but that's how I've been conditioned to see.
I don't think there's a wrong answer.
Well, actually,
I got a couple. I got some honorable mentions. There's a character from the DC comic universe called Blackbriar Thorn. He was trying to escape Templars or something and turned himself into a tree and stayed that way for like a couple hundred years, and then came out as this like druidic powered, and he fights Superman. I don't know much about it, but I learned that today and thought that was interesting. Obviously,
Poison Ivy.
That's on the list. Yeah, Poison Ivy for sure.
That was next.
Yeah, Poison Ivy for sure, because not only does she have the power to influence plant life and create monstrous plant life, but she does it because she's a botanist and can feel the suffering of plants. I'm not sure her origin, like how she became how she is, probably in a failed experiment of some sort. I had to fresh up on that, but
probably.
Then Beast Boy, like I mentioned before, Bjorn. We talked about Moana a little bit before today. Maui is definitely a druid, the ability to shapeshift and control the natural world around him. Aquaman, being able to control fish and being like, the protector of the seas type of thing. And if I mention any of yours that you want to deep dive into, go for it. The Swamp Benders from Avatar, but also Aang himself in that episode has a lot of druidic flavor going on.
I would say like just in general Aang, or just pretty much the entire universe, really.
I'd say like the Avatar specifically being the bridge between the spirit world and the material world, like definitely druidic.
And just like all their power comes from nature in various forms, right?
Yeah, that's true. I would also say Freya in God of War.
Yes.
When you come across her, definitely like she lives in a fucking turtle. Like,
yeah, she's a druid through and through.
Yeah, really like even the how she like brings back brings back that giant to life just with like her magic powers. Super cool. Captain Planet as a meme. Definitely. I mean, how much more modern druid do you get than that? But the one I want to break down is from Star Wars. And I want to talk about Ezra Bridger. So Ezra Bridger is from a show called Star Wars Rebels. It's new canon. So if you haven't seen it, it came out a few years ago. It follows the story of a small faction of rebels before the Rebel Alliance really gets formed. One of them, among them, is a former Padawan who never finished his training. His name is Kanan Jarrus, or I forgot his actual name. Caleb Doom. Nice. I'm in the Star Wars Trivia League thing, and so this is important to me and no one else. But I
Nerd.
appreciate your patience. Yeah. You can find it on Twitch,
brother.
First Class League. This guy stinks. But yeah, Ezra Bridger is taken in by this group of rebels. And he has some force abilities naturally. And so this former Padawan is reluctant at first, as most former Padawans are, but eventually agrees to train him in the ways of the Force. Ezra's like most Jedi who learn at an older age. I think he's the same age as Luke, and so he's about 14 or 13 in the series. Um, anyway, his true power comes from his ability to connect to animals. So we first see it. He interacts with like this cat called a Loth cat. They're really friendly with him, but the big sort of payoff, and again, spoilers. There's an episode where there's these giant space whales, and these space whales have the natural ability to travel through hyperspace on their own. And that's why you never see them, because they live in hyperspace. Um, but they come across them, it's super rare, and they communicate with Ezra. He can sort of like reach out and feel what they're thinking, and that's how they like solve that episode. But at the end, it's fucking so sick. They're trying to get Grand Admiral Thrawn, which is like this, he's a Moff or Grand Admiral for the Empire. They're trying to get him and his what would you call that, battalion, blockade, whatever, off of this one particular planet. um and Ezra sort of sacrifices himself. He goes into like this flagship, the Star Destroyer, and then he calls out to the space whales, and they come and wrap the ship up, and they're like, they have like these weird tentacle things, but they like wrap the Star Destroyer up and then like take it into hyperspace to like the far realms. And this happens about 5 years before Star Wars Episode 4 takes place. And since that time in the canon timeline, we haven't seen Ezra. So Ezra will probably show up in some form in like the Ahsoka series, I'm guessing, or one of the new Disney Plus series. But I hope when we come across him, he's like this druidic, like he's just living off the land type of thing. You could also say Yoda is similar in that druidic way, his
Mhm.
force abilities to reach out to things. And we see like the contrast. This is someone like Luke, who has no ability to communicate with animals. And we see that when he gets fucked up by the Tauntaun or the Dianoga and the Death Star and stuff like that. So Ezra was a cool one for me. And then obviously Radagast the Brown. Um, I think that's like you, Luca. That's the one I think of when I think of Druid, like just
Mhm.
dirty candle wax beard,
Yep.
fucking, you know, like why do you could shower, man? You don't have to look like this. But yeah, I think that's everything I had on my list here. I love Druids. What about you, Will?
Um, yeah, some of mine were mentioned, but I just thought of like if you want to like abandon like the shapeshifter routes, like I kind of like the idea of like druids also like being able to like communicate with like spirits of nature and stuff like that. Um, which also brings to mind Shaman King.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
cool. Obscure
right.
reference.
Yeah. I know. It
But
just came to my
man,
mind.
Shaman King's one of those shows. I fucking try to be like, yo, do you remember the show with the guy with the fucking headphones and like fucking the backpack and like he had a big samurai behind him? People are like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah, it just came to my mind. I haven't like thought of it since like 2005, but um,
Such a cool show.
yeah, definitely underrated. But unless it was more terrible than we remember, I don't know. Um,
That usually happens.
yeah, um, yeah, I don't know. I kind of like I definitely like the nature as a source of power and like if you look at like the Divinity original Sin games, especially with number two, it's kind of cool that um, while like nature is not just the font of magic, um, a lot of like the mage classes and stuff like that like have druidic powers, but they're all like each like instead of like a druid being like a central class where they have like all these nature powers, like nature powers are like spread out amongst all these different ones. So they have like specialized classes where it's like, for example, like one is like it's cool. It's called like a hydrosophist, and it's like a mage slash druid that also just like focuses on like water and stuff like that, and like ice and that kind of stuff. And then they have like geomancers and stuff like that too, um, which is like it's definitely like one of my favorite series that like does magic like in a cool way, I guess. Um, Especially for like, uh, oh yeah, we didn't release that episode, the ancient unreleased episode number 1, um,
Oh,
where we talked about magic systems and stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
Funny enough, while we did that episode of Magic Systems, none of us really brought up natural magics as a system.
Yeah, because like, yeah, that's true. Um, yeah, as a side note, yeah, what I was trying to say is, because like usually like magic depicted in video games is just like press button and then like wait for cooldown, or just press button and like hold it down.
Right.
I like the Divinity games because like I think they did a pretty good job of like handling their magic systems and stuff like that. Definitely worth checking out. But also, shit. Oh yeah,
Yeah, shit.
nature powers. The Dragonborn from Skyrim.
Oh,
You know, like using like the what's the name of the dragon tongue?
What's the name of it?
Yeah,
Shouts?
the
Like-
Thum.
yeah,
the
the
Thum.
Thum. Yeah, I mean that'd be a good like nature power.
See, I disagree. While I think dragons in some mythologies are natural, I'm not sure about their origins in Skyrim or Elder Scrolls lore. But I would see the dragon tongue
They're
as being.
shards of Akatosh, the
Sure.
time dragon.
Oh yeah. Sorry, my bad. But I see the Thum as arcane casting because you're reciting specific phrases in order to enact. Which I'm not saying druids can't do that, but that to me more feels like playing on the fabric of the universe and influencing it in an arcane way more so than
So,
using.
like, what about like the spell to like change, like the shout to like change weather and stuff like that? That's what I guess that's more what I was thinking of. And like
Okay,
the
look,
wind spells.
I think this is a really interesting thing. Is like, Luca, you're an arcane purist or a caster purist, but more specifically with arcane magic. So, what do you feel is like the actual difference between arcane and druidic magic? Like, we know one's natural, but in terms of casting, in terms of how they affect the world, what's the actual difference?
For me personally, it's not a difference of how they affect the world, it's how you cast it, like how you gain your power. So to me, a druid draws either natural energy from like nature itself in order to do whatever they do. Whereas like something like, I agree with you, like the Thum would be either, I mean, in terms of D&D, you'd be either a wizard or a sorcerer maybe. Just because like you're drawing first of all on knowledge of the word, which is very wizard like for D&D. You need to say the specific word, and you need to like, so, yeah, there's no like variation of it. You're not drawing on any natural, you're just simply invoking that ability. Whereas a druid would be like, you would need, I feel like druids have the prerequisite of being one with nature, or at least understanding it to the degree that is necessary to use its power. So yeah, the Thum would, in my opinion, be arcane or sorcerer like.
Yeah, I'd say sorcerer because not only do you need to know, but you need to physically be able to use the Thum, which not everyone can do. I know Ulfric can do it, and they never explain why. But like, Will, you probably know
the Greybeards can too.
Right. Oh, right.
But like that's one of the things about like why they study the Thum at the throat of the world in High Hrothgar. Is like the whole point is to like attune yourself with like the world.
Ah,
Yeah, like there's
Well,
elements of both, but I think it just leans a little on the arcane side because of the fact that they're not studying the world, they're studying the word. You
and
know,
I would say too that the graybeards are sort of um ignorant of the world. Like they neglect the world in their ability to acquire this knowledge. You know what I
and
mean?
even when you learn shouts from them.
How could you
Hey,
turn your back
coming
on
from
me?
the one who fucking killed Parthenax, I don't want to hear it, buddy.
I had to see what happened.
You
sicko.
monster.
Absolute monster. Like you know
Took
that
his power
YouTube.
bonus, and then I killed him.
Oh, you're a psychopath.
And I used the power bonus for a power I'd never even used.
Oh, it just gets worse and worse.
He screamed as he died.
Oh, dude.
Jeez, man. Motherfucker killed Parthenax and enjoyed it. You sicko.
That's disgusting.
Yeah, where did that get you with the blades?
Yeah.
Absolute buffoon.
Killed him too.
Oh, you're sick. Yeah. I don't know. I think it's interesting the difference between arcane, druidic, and I don't even know it. I guess sorcerers are also arcane, just without the need to study.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
Like
even the
that-
fact that like the graybeards study, like that's a wizard thing. Studying and
Really
like
meditate.
nerds. And
Sit
like
outside.
but even when you learn words from them, you gain their understanding of the word specifically, like very specifically. Not like you don't gain their understanding of the world. You like they shout the word into the ground, then you like absorb their years of meditating on what the meaning of the word is. Like I don't think any really magic, even like the alteration magic that like would maybe be on that like side of like druidic, like like the ebony armor spell and like that kind of stuff.
Oak flesh.
I think maybe
Yeah.
like the hag ravens are druids.
But
Yeah.
that's more of a witch though.
Yeah, but I think like that fey
Mhm.
sort of
like your Spriggans.
yeah,
Yeah.
which you often find with the hag ravens, right? Like
Do you know?
You can get married to one.
You can
you
marry,
can marry
a
a hag
Spriggan?
raven.
Yeah, or something like that. It's from like that one quest where you get like the Rose of Sanguine or Sanguine's Rose. It's like,
Oh no, you get
you go to the
married.
tavern in Rorikstead and you get like hammered.
Yeah. You have to, like it's like the hangover mission.
Yeah.
I don't know. For me, like it's hard to see the like. I definitely see like druids and witches, I guess slash like warlocks as like similar, but also like very distinct. So, like, what do you guys think about like the differences between those?
Like warlocks, druids, and witches. I think I'd put warlock completely like because there's so many flavors of warlock, but maybe like a fey lock would sort of fall into that category. But
Is that like a D&D thing?
it's like a warlock of an archfey. Yeah, it's like their
Fuck.
patron is an archfey.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry. I just expect people to know this fucking stupid shit I'm talking about.
Archfey.
Yeah, the archfey is a fucking, someone from the Fey. Fucking, I'm so lame. Oh, it's like an elven deity. It's like an elven god. Okay,
Okay.
and they're usually like they just do shit for shits and gigs. They're not like they might be omniscient, but they just want to fuck shit up and have a
Oh, yeah. See, like, yeah. When I think of warlock, I just think of like a male witch.
Yeah, but like witch, like what is it's often used, like warlock is often used as just like the male version of a witch. But like if we're talking about D&D, warlock is very specifically defined as a spellcaster who has a patron who gives them their power.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yes, that's what. Do you now understand that reference?
As a side note, Gilly is our
He's our
team's
mascot in our NHL online game, who gives us our power.
Eldritch being.
He's
You
an Eldritch
nerd.
Yeah, this carries with us everywhere we go.
Yeah, we'll see him later.
Yeah,
That's hilarious.
See, like, which I see is like that old hag living in the woods.
So I think it is interesting though, like
Boiling
witches
potions.
versus like druids, because for some reason I feel like there's a difference in that the druid has earned their knowledge, and I feel like a witch is like exploiting it. But I mean, you could also call Freya in God of War a witch. I think they referred to her as a witch at one point. But
Yeah, specifically.
as soon as I saw it, I was like,
Several
oh, sweet, a
times.
druid. Like, but yeah, I think witches might fall under that, and definitely like it's always like, oh, the witch that's using like, oh, the magic, you know.
Mhm.
Yeah, because
But-
like the first thing that comes to mind is we talked about earlier was Morrigan from
Yeah,
Dragon Age.
right.
Dragon Age. I think I'm using my Dragon Age case as a stand.
Yeah, Will's got quite the setup. Maybe I'll throw a picture right here in the in the
It's
video.
called the Dragon Age.
Nice. But yeah, no. I think maybe you're right. I would see like the witch as I mean, we don't need to assign gender to druid, but I could see like that historically have being the female counterpart to like a
Yeah.
druid type of thing.
But maybe like I would see like witches as more like nefarious.
Right,
that
but
could
I
also
think
be,
it
like
maybe like it's interesting to like play on like the world or nature in some places is more malicious than in other places.
yeah.
And it's depend like, or you can interpret it however you want. And so you could pull from the same tree I'm pulling for and do fucked up shit with it, and I'm using it to like, you know, turn into a bear. You know.
Yeah, to me, the word witch has never had like it was, like especially just reading it, like where witch is used. It's essentially used in like fantasy that I've been reading is just like any female magic caster is a witch. You know, so
Right.
like to me, witch is one of those like umbrella terms, like wizard, for example. Like outside of D&D, like the rules of D&D, the word wizard to me just means like any magic caster. Like when we're talking about druid, it means specifically like, druid is somebody drawing from nature. Warlock is somebody drawing from a patron, a cleric and paladin drawing from a god. Like,
Yeah.
whereas like wizard, witch, sorcerer are kind of like blanket terms just for like anybody using magic. So
Right.
when I hear witch, I just think of like gendered magic caster for women.
I would like I can see that.
I mean,
I
it
don't
has
know, like-
negative connotations because of like popular culture.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
But like at this point, when I hear the word witch, I don't like, because there's so many very like good characters that I've read where like they're called witches, but they're just like, it's just a female magic caster called a witch, but she's like morally upstanding and everything. So I no longer have like this negative connotation. It's like the Disney witch is like the, you know, the evil witch, like the crooked nose.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the reason why like in Disney and like in children's fantasy or things that are geared towards children, they're called witches because calling something a hag has like it's just like an ugly word.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Mhm.
But even like hag is used as like an insult. But like for me, obviously, like you never want to be a hag, but a hag is a very specific being.
Yeah.
You know,
Like a hag
what are they
raven.
called in? Are they called witches in The Witcher as well? Oh, fucking idiot! Yeah, they probably are.
Well, no, because a witcher is different from a witch.
sorceresses. They're called sorceresses often in The Witcher.
No, not from whatever that academy's called, but those three disgusting looking.
Oh yeah, the sisters.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
the witches in the.
Oh, so they're witches.
Yeah, the
But
witches
I see,
of the wood.
when I saw them, I was like, cool. There's hags. You know.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
there's hags in The Witcher though. They're like a monster type.
Yeah.
Oh, gross.
Grave hags.
Yeah, grave hags and water hags. Is there any other ones? I think there's just
That's
those
it.
two.
Burr hags.
They're from like Eastern European folklore. They're called Baba Yagas, which is
Yeah,
what
yeah.
they used in John Wick to call him the boogeyman, which is totally wrong.
Oh.
Like a Baba Yaga is like an old woman with droopy breasts, like very specific, like from Eastern European folklore.
Yeah.
Like that's what they look like in
Sexy
The Witcher. Like they're nasty. They're so scary. And that's what they called John Wick in the movie John Wick.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, the Baba Yaga. Like Baba means grandma.
Yeah. Right.
Like,
Right.
it's not.
I just finished like in a campaign I'm running right now. We're in the midst of like the story arc with Coven, of hags.
Mm.
So for me, it's like a very specific type of thing.
Mhm.
But yeah, witch, I guess too. But like, it's confusing for my players, I think, because there is a woman in this village who's just like this half elf woman who gets referred to as a witch by the people that live around her because she's a arcane caster. But then they're also dealing with like these hags, and they're like, "Oh, that woman like had us duped the whole time," and I'm like, "Yeah, totally," you know,
People and their assumptions.
right?
Yeah.
So
Wow,
ignorant.
we the omniscient DMs of the world
Yeah.
used people in fools. Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
guys, any final thoughts on druids?
I like the idea of like a malevolent druid, which is like used pretty heavily in the AC Valhalla DLC. Yeah.
That is a thing in D&D too. There's something called an archdruid, and it's sort of like a
Archfey.
lich. No, silly. It's sort of like a archmage, but the druid counterpart. And they can make themselves live longer than normal. There's also like I can't remember what the good counterpart of a lich. Maybe it's like an arch lich or something. But that's someone who like makes themselves eternal, like skeletal form, but they're doing it for good reasons. Whereas a lich is just like I want to live forever, fuck everybody.
Yeah.
Like the Talani Mass from the Malazan.
Correct. But then there's an arch druid who's the lich equivalent of a druid, which can be evil. Like they're just like I don't want to become part of nature. I just want to pull from nature. Yeah. So yeah,
Oh,
Kind of like
I
all the
a
magic in
malevolent
The
druid.
Witcher too.
Yeah, and I've used druids like in my own games is like so like there's like some sort of corruption in the forest or there's a hag specifically in mine there was a hag that came in and started like corrupting these dryads, these like tree being people like I talked about in the previous episode. And so the dryad like gets this druid who's also concerned with what's happening to the land to like help them. But this druid's like because he's been an outcast for so long, he's sort of lost a little bit of his social skills. And
like
like,
me.
yeah, but you've been stuck inside, not out. But like the rest of us. But yeah, no, I think using druids as like creepy dude in the woods. Don't send your kid in the woods. There's a creepy man out there with wax in his beard.
Like me.
Yeah. Jesus. Oh, yeah. I think I cut you off there. Will, my bad. Were you finishing something?
um yeah, yeah, like what I was saying with their depiction in AC Valhalla is like very much like insidious. Um like I mean like the story is kind of corny, which I won't go into because it was kind of that was like the only little bit of letdown. But like it was kind of cool because like their powers were gained from like basically creating like this like toxic haze, and like they would like throw that down and then like your character would start like tripping because it was basically just like boiled mushrooms that they're throwing at you. And
Gross.
then but like you like see like all these like weird like your character sees like all these like weird visions and stuff like that on screen.
All
And,
of the magic mushrooms, literally.
yeah,
That's
well
sick.
that's probably what they were doing. um just like dudes are just like running out into the woods outside of the village at night to get fucked up on psilocybin and the rest of the boys. But yeah, no, like the ones in Assassin's Creed are pretty cool because it's like as a quick gist of the story, it's like the High King of Ireland who's also Christian is trying to like gain control of the whole island and stuff like that, and like bring about order and stuff. But then there's like these like druids that are just like using like magic and stuff like that, and they're like pretty terrifying because like they have like antlers and stuff like that like on their helmets and wear like all these robes and stuff like that to like blend in with trees, and use like crazy looking weapons and stuff. um
Have you
Absolutely
played Far Cry Primal?
yeah,
Definitely reminds me of the different tribes you sort of meet in that game too.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, like that kind of like like spookiness of nature and stuff like that. As a side note, I kind of think that maybe like I said, like how I like druids as like the kind of like the more malevolent kind, because like when we think of nature, like we think of like stuff like that's like outside of like more like urbanized areas, so like it's kind of like a part of that unknown, because nature is a social construct. But so like it's like I don't know, like for me, like I'm not like the biggest horror fan, but like I like horror when it's like based on like the unknown. So like when you have like these other people, or like let's say it's like one malevolent druid, like an arch druid, like you were talking about, like if it's just like one person like who's like by themselves like in the woods but has like all this power and stuff like that, like it's kind of like terrifying, because like let's say if you're like running like a D&D campaign or episode or whatever, and like your like characters are like going through that, like that's like spooky as hell, man.
Yeah, like a druid who's like, yeah, I have control over wolves, bears,
Yeah.
snakes in this area, and now
And
like humans just don't come to these woods anymore, even though there's like a something on the other side of it. So you
yeah,
players
and
show up in this village and they're like, no one's been able to get through in years or whatever.
yeah, and like that's literally like one of the towns like in Assassin's Creed Valhalla's like DLC, Wrath of the Druids, is like that's pretty much it. Like you actually have to like sneak into this town that's like under the druid control, and like everyone there's like weird as fuck because like they've been cut off
Yeah.
from the outside. It's like hillbilly magic.
Yeah, there's also that I just remember after I said it, in Far Cry Primal, the tribe that you're in, there's definitely like druid.
Loja.
Yeah, the Wenja. There's that woman, I can't remember her name. But she sort of serves that role, and like she'll like mix you up a paste and make you drink it. You're like, oh, what the fuck? And then you wake up and now you have like new powers and shit. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Yeah, so overall I love druids. I think everyone should play one at least once. I think druid is like one of the best classes if you're doing like a pickup game. Just because it's super useful, and like that feeling of like, okay, the door's locked. All right, I turn into a snake and I go underneath it, pop back up as myself, and I open the door for everyone. It's just the best, you know?
But what if you're underground?
If you're underground, you turn into a spider and crawl up the top, you know?
Be a mole.
Be a mole.
Yeah.
Or if you go into the water, now I'm a fish or a shark or whatever, you know? Yeah. And talking to trees is awesome because you can get a lot of insight from trees. Yeah, those are my final
creating
thoughts.
Massive hurricanes and stuff, and
That too.
lightning storms and annihilate everyone. And
Yeah,
crush
to
your
keep the
enemies.
humans away from the sacred trees, obviously. What about you, Luca? Any final thoughts?
I have to say, through this conversation, the idea of playing a druid has grown on me,
Nice.
and I'm not opposed to playing a druid in a next campaign or in a one shot or something.
Cool.
I
Well,
will definitely try it.
great time to mention to our viewers and listeners out there, we're actually going to be playing at the end of this series where we go through character classes. As you've probably heard already, some of us are not too fond of certain classes.
Lords.
And so those are the specific classes that we're going to play. So I've thought about playing a barbarian because I'm not into that concept. Maybe after last week's, I'll end up playing a paladin because
The
holy,
alt-race paladin.
alt-right paladin, probably not. But we'll be playing a game. We'll be recording that game, and we'll have a guest on to DM so you can see us all play through that game. And so that's where we're all leading with this series of character classes. So
Nice.
Yes,
That's news to
that.
me too.
This is the first
yeah.
we've heard of.
I sent it in the group chat. But yeah, as always, I am Matt.
I'm Luca.
And I'm Will. And this has been
Jesus, are you
Sexy
okay?
Podcast.
And this has been a sexy podcast for sexy lords of lore.